You're listening to the ProcureTech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, procurement pro, digital nomad, and ProcureTech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Yes, a very warm welcome to another episode of the ProcureTech podcast, where every week we bring you everything that is exciting and innovative in the digital procurement space. And this week we're going to be talking about a very, very pertinent topic at the moment, especially in light of inflation and supply chain challenges and all the other things that we're being bombarded with at the moment as procurement professionals, particularly in relation to direct materials and production. So we're going to be talking about the topic of innovation and also how software can accelerate and facilitate that. And my guest today has a module in their software offering that does exactly that and have been very successful in going to market with it. So I would like to welcome to this week's show, Maciej or Matt Zaleski from Procurence Meercat. Matt, very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Welcome as well.
So, procurement and quality management software. Let's just start. Maybe just give a brief overview of what Procurence Meercat does more holistically, and then we can drill down into how you came about bringing on the supplier innovation module and why that is so important, especially in today's market.
Mm-hmm. My background is in procurement consulting. I used to work as a consultant for about 8 years, focusing on supplier management, supply chain risk management. And I grew frustrated with what was out there in the market because we always ended up leaving the customer with an Excel file and hoping that at any certain point they would implement a software. And hence came the idea of Procurence as a software provider for the business. That's easy to implement and easy to use. And we've basically started with this area of supplier master data, supplier management and risk. And over the years, we've grown into a full procurement platform with a very strong quality component. So connecting both the purchasing world, the quality management, the R&D and new product introduction. And what we do is we always talk to our customers what they need. So we always try to be very practice oriented. And if we do introduce a new module, then it's always based on a particular customer and trying to solve the problem they have at the moment. So the whole issue of supplier innovation came from our customer, AGCO Corporation. It's a Fortune 500 company. They are an agricultural equipment manufacturer, so they do tractors, combine harvesters, and you might probably know them more through their brands, Fendt, Massey Ferguson, Challenger. And they are a very innovative company in itself. If you think about a tractor that they produce, they usually cost in the range of hundreds of thousands of euros. They are extremely high-tech equipment. So forget about the old time farmers and simply mechanical tractors. Think about a tractor that when you draw a line on a map, it will drive itself automatically with a precision of plus minus 3 centimeters. So that's the kind of high tech innovations that they built in. And they basically came to us and said, we need to streamline the communication with our suppliers concerning innovation. And that's how the whole thing started.
So how would you define supplier innovation then? Because on the one hand, it's, I guess, making sure that the product is designed to cost, but there's, as we know, and as we explore a lot more on this podcast and also in the procurement world in general, there's much more focus now on things like quality and sustainability, understandably. So how do you define it? And then I guess the second part to that question is which other stakeholders within an organization, and we can maybe use your example from AGCO as a good example, would typically it's going to be dependent on industry sector to a certain extent, but who would typically then be involved in this whole innovation workshop and process and designing the future in terms of what does good look like?
Yeah, so the definition of innovation is a key item for a successful introduction of a good innovation platform. People usually, when you think about innovation, you have this kind of flash in your head, iPhone, Tesla. So talking about the highly innovative products or highly innovative features, and this is of course one facet, and you are as a company always striving for that a key differentiating factor versus the competitors. But an innovation from a perspective of procurement is also what hides below the waterline. So the features is the top of the iceberg, and underneath you have things like continuous improvement, where you can have a stream of very small tweaks, both to the products or to the components, to the processes, that in the end drive you towards a better cost position as a company, or drive increasing efficiency. And if you bear this in mind, this kind of differing facets of innovations, then you will have different stakeholders who drive the process. Yeah? Because if you think about the typical NPI, where your company is the innovative party, this is driven by marketing, this is driven by R&D, who then talk to procurement and say, okay, find us the most capable hands to deliver what we're asking for, where we have the very clear vision. Now, if you go towards the other definitions of supplier innovation, so those continuous improvement, supplier idea generation, then suddenly the stakeholders increase, because you move then from the typical R&D, this top-down approach, to rather bottom-up approach, where it is the suppliers that come to you with their ideas, and you're trying to evaluate whether or not this idea fits your organization. Can it be implemented? And it can be pushed either just to procurement, to the operations, and even up the ladder, as it were, to R&D and marketing, where the suppliers come up with new features and marketing realizes, this is actually something that we can use on a sales side as well.
And that's a really important distinction, actually, because if the supplier is involved early in this process, then the supplier can then provide feedback, I guess, in terms of how difficult the original design is to manufacture, or how it may drive up cost in terms of the materials, or generate quality problems as a result of the design. So that early involvement and sort of having the supplier being able to offer their feedback sort of almost unsolicited during that process, rather than being explicitly asked for their thoughts further down the line, is a very, very big distinction, isn't it? And certainly, if I cast my mind back to when I worked in the automotive industry buying direct materials, 15 years ago, pretty much, we didn't really engage much with suppliers in the actual design and thought phase. And I guess now that's a necessity with things like supply chain problems and all of the rising costs of raw materials. It is a necessity to think of your suppliers as an extended part of your team.
Absolutely. People often forget that the R&D people, they are of course professionals, but a lot of them create the designs as, in a way, theoreticians. A lot of them don't have hands-on experience in the production, and they do not realize that what they design looks good on paper and fulfills the requirements of the customers, but it might be more problematic for the suppliers to produce. And of course, if you have a typical hands-off approach, then a supplier will simply do what you ask them to do. But somewhere in the back room, they will laugh at the customer, saying, this is stupid, what the customer asked us to do, but if they pay, then it's fine. Whereas if you go towards the supplier collaboration, where you think of each other as team members, then those people who have hands-on experience in production can come back to an R&D saying, well, we think we can do it better. and it can improve the cycle times. It can improve the use of additional materials and so on. And those small innovations should not be underestimated, because they should be an ongoing part of the operations of a company that's well established.
And I guess the obvious question is then, how can software assist this process? I mean, the one obvious example I'm thinking of is that it just brings everything into a single source of truth. So as if you've got suppliers that are already doing this, but are doing it offline and in the background, and they're not really being acknowledged for it, then as the buyer, you're maybe not necessarily aware of that added value when you go into a round of sourcing for a new product. But I'm sure there are many other ways as well.
Absolutely. So first of all, software is used to channel the communication between the internal stakeholders and the suppliers. And this channeling should go both ways, because on one hand, within the company, you have a number of stakeholders who are looking for solutions to a problem. It happens very often, especially if the company is a non-productive company, where they know what the problem is, but they can't find or they can't define how exactly to solve the problem. So we can put it forth to the supply base and ask them, look, we have a problem with ventilation, with dashboards, with paints, or any other issue you can come up with. And simply it's like crowdsourcing, basically speaking, but within the supply chain. So the first thing that the software does is it allows the customer to create topics of interest, kind of like buckets where people can throw in their ideas, and that facilitates the communication this way. Where it also facilitates communication is from the side of the supplier to the side of the internal stakeholder, because let us not forget that procurement does not know everything about what's going on in a company. And typically, procurement always wants to have well-specified problems and solutions. So if they have an internal stakeholder coming in saying, I'd like to have a solution to this and this, they will say, well, come back to us when you have 10 pages of specifications, and then we're going to do a tender. So what will happen then is that internal stakeholders will stop coming to procurement with fuzzy ideas, because then they know they won't get any help. So if a supplier at the same time comes into procurement and says, hey guys, I have a new solution that might be of interest to you, what will happen very often that procurement will say, hey, it looks nice, but we're actually not interested. We don't think that this will be of benefit to our company, not knowing that at the same time there is somebody within the other 40,000 people of the workforce who are actually looking for that specific solution. So what the software does, apart from the ongoing day-to-day communication with a new idea being requested by the customer, the supplier submits this idea for evaluation and then receives the feedback. It also serves as a repository of potential ideas. And then if somebody comes in after a year or 2 years and say, okay, this is exactly what I needed. I've been looking for a solution as well. Yeah, this is something, if I might add one thing. So this is not a theoretical construct. So the story that I've been telling about, this is something that, for example, the German railways, so they're our customer, and this is exactly what they're facing. So they're not a production company where it's all top down, this clear communication, centralized communication between R&D and procurement and the suppliers. Because they're a service organization, and such a broad service organizations with different needs, from trains to stations to electricity and so on, this is very much decentralized within the organization, but they still have that need to obtain the innovations from the market on a constant basis.
So just a quick interlude, because there are a couple of things that I really want to make you aware of, because I think they will be valuable for you. So number one, we now have a monthly newsletter where we bring you curated content of everything that's happening in the digital procurement space. If you want to get that, just head to procuretechpodcast.com/newsletter, enter your name and email, and we'll get that delivered straight to your inbox. Number two, if you're a head of procurement or a center of excellence leader, and you're perhaps a little bit confused or overwhelmed with what's out there as best of breed digital procurement technology, especially if you're a mid-sized business, schedule a call with me. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes in this episode. Just hit that schedule a call link and we can have a quick chat to understand your challenges and what potential solutions out there may be suitable for your organization. And now let's get right back to this week's show. And I think from a procurement professional standpoint, we generally would welcome stakeholders speaking to suppliers off their own initiative, or suppliers approaching stakeholders. But I think the key point is here that there needs to be documentation of what's going on. Exactly what you alluded to. So as there is a database of initiatives that everyone can access and have visibility of outside of people's email inboxes. But I think the other thing is, certainly from a procurement standpoint, is that it makes us aware of what's in the pipeline and what may be gathering pace. Because then if a stakeholder is at risk then of being asked to do something or tries to do something commercially that they shouldn't be doing, that is sort of procurement's job essentially, then it gives us then that visibility to be able to contact the stakeholder in question and to ask them how we can support them. So it's two ways in terms of both building the database, but also having that visibility to enable us not to be in the situation where, you know, the typical situation happens where the quotation lands on procurement's desk with a request, can you negotiate 10% off this price? By the way, we need a purchase order tomorrow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is the case. So that's one way of kind of wrestling the control back from R&D to procurement where it should stay.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the less traditional methods to drive innovation and how maybe a software platform can drive this. And I looked at three, and this was from an article that you shared with me when we were looking at putting this together. So there are supplier innovation days, and most big companies, I think, do that nowadays. And then there's the more traditional hackathon approach, which comes from the startup and from the agile culture. And then there are design to cost workshops with suppliers when suppliers come in and share their insights of, as you alluded to earlier, with their knowledge of the production process in their factory, can offer ways that a product can be made at a lower cost according to their production process. So how would you be able to leverage technology and software to facilitate, maybe just take one or two examples from those?
Yeah, so starting from the beginning on your example, so supplier innovation days. So one way we support our customers in this one is that the software allows the suppliers to submit their innovation ideas specifically for the innovation day. So that's, for example, what the German railways do. They have this annual innovation day, and they welcome submissions from the suppliers for the main awards. And those submissions are then routed, first of all, to the main innovation team, who make the first check. Then it's sent over to a number of experts who do an in-depth analysis, whether or not this is viable, feasible, and so on. And then even go the third step, where they, after the initial analysis, they sent it off to a broader range of internal employees who do voting about how innovative, viable, and so on the idea is. And based on that, they can then submit, or they decide on which supplier receives the award. But even let's say, apart from this ad hoc approach for let's submit ideas for the supplier innovation, having all those innovations in the software allows you to also evaluate your suppliers on their innovative potential. Because right now, even when companies do supplier assessments, let's say every year or every 2 years, and even should they evaluate whether the supplier is innovative or not, this is all very much subjective. So, the person who fills out the questionnaire comes back in their mind to the last year and think, did I receive any help from the supplier or not? And if all of that communication goes through the platform, you have actual hard KPIs in the system. How many ideas were submitted by the supplier? How many of them were found to be viable to undergo an extensive analysis? And how many of them were implemented? And also the idea is that maybe after 1 or 2 years, you come back to that and evaluate again, was this idea implemented? Is everybody happy about it? So that you have this full idea lifecycle evaluation. When it comes to hackathons or design to cost, so this is a similar approach. Simply what we did is a mobile-friendly version that you can have what we call an innovation topic that is closed off to all the suppliers. It's only open to a number of selected suppliers who then submit their ideas specifically on the topic that the customer is interested in. And in this way, on one hand, you enable this supply chain innovation, and on the other hand, you also keep your cards covered so that not everybody out there knows that you're looking for innovations from a specific range or category. And the same goes to design to cost. So we allow the suppliers not only to, when they submit the idea, they will select the benefits that the idea might bring, and that's basically from a, let's say, qualitative approach where they have a number of tick boxes they can select and enter a description of the benefits to the clients. But we also can go then to the next step where if the supplier already supplies the given part, they can select it from the parts database, from the material database, and then say, well, our idea will decrease the unit cost from this amount to this amount. We know how many are produced. So the system automatically will give an evaluation of what is the savings potential, what are the associated CapEx costs or other costs. And then you can evaluate also the savings on a cost basis and then push it to the proper savings management. So it's kind of the opposite of what you do with consultants. Usually when you have a cost optimization project, you call in outside consultants and they do that top down. So they force the suppliers, let's say through negotiations or through product redesign, to lower the cost. And then here it's got the bottom-up sourcing of the ideas as well.
So it's just putting the initiative onto the supplier rather than waiting until you're knocking on their door with a lean team or with a bunch of consultants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And at this point, maybe I wanted to add one more thing, because I think it's very much underappreciated by people. The supplier innovation is about win-win. So when you start a supplier innovation program, you need to think about both parties, not only what you gain, but also what the suppliers potentially gain. So, of course, in a simplest case, they need to gain acknowledgement. So that you communicate with them about the ideas that they submitted and tell them whether you've implemented them, or if not, then why. Because the worst thing that can happen, and I'm sure it's happening out there all the time right now, supplier comes into the customer, says, we have an idea, and then this idea gets lost. So it's very demotivating for the supplier. But the second thing on the win-win is, of course, okay, if an idea reduces the cost, how do you share the cost how do you share the savings between yourself and a supplier? And what else can you promise to the supplier as well, that they feel appreciated and that they see the benefits of that cooperation?
I'm glad you raised that, actually, because I was going to ask a sort of similar question next, which is, how do you go about measuring then the return on investment in terms of, well, not only on investing in the software, but in the resources that are needed both from buyer and supplier to facilitate this? Because at the end of the day, especially if you're having some sort of gain sharing agreement with the supplier, any innovation that doesn't bring clearly identifiable P&L savings will typically not be reported will not be acknowledged by the CFO. So maybe just share some examples with some of the different customers that you've implemented this for, their approaches around recognizing that saving, and if they are doing gain shares, how are they working with the supplier to ensure that both parties are happy?
Yeah. So when it comes to the software, that's the easiest, I think, for us. And just to give, I can give you some hard indicators. So from actual KPIs from a client's implementation and very early on in implementation. So after 2 months from the start of the project, without even major, let's say, marketing campaign within the supply chain, they managed to get over 70 innovation ideas from suppliers in 11 countries with a savings potential of 250,000 euros, which is way, way, way more than was spent on the actual development or the actual application. So it does pay off straight away. So that's, well, of course, easiest if I can give you those kind of numbers, because they say, okay, money potentially saved is there. So that's one approach. And here also, what can be done, even in the projects that are not implemented, that we have, for example, automatic alerts for top management. If a new idea with a high savings potential come in, then you can set thresholds above which, for example, mid-management or even the CPO gets informed, hey, there's a new idea with that potential, or if that idea gets rejected, so that the boss can come back and say, why did we reject an idea for, I don't know, for 100,000 euros, as it might be. But if you look at the return on investment, it's also, it's not only about cost, it's also about speed to market. So there was a study by McKinsey where they found that if you have externally sourced innovations, they are typically commercialized 40% faster than those in-house ideas, because they've already been, at the very least, partly validated by the supplier. So that's a staggering, if you think, staggering statistic. And you can also increase the product offering. So there's another interesting article. There was an interview with, and I always have issues with pronouncing that name, I think Mondelez, formerly Kraft Foods. Yeah. They used to have a very, very easy to pronounce name, and now it gets complicated. So there is an article, there's an interview with Jean-Baptiste Rubens, the head of procurement innovation, where he says that, and I quote here, today, if you look at our company's organic net revenue growth in Europe, at least 50% of the growth is coming from supplier contribution.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can also think about not only in terms of can you have savings from what the suppliers come up with, or it's more about can you introduce new products to the market based on the ideas of the suppliers. And only if you consider all of those metrics can you actually think about it's an ongoing success of supplier innovation.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I come from the consumer goods industry as well, and in my most recent sort of corporate past, and certainly innovation around machinery and equipment and how that could facilitate improvements to operational efficiency in the factory was a big area of supplier innovation that we would get involved in back in the day when I purchased CapEx. So yeah, I can completely see how that statistic from Mondelez would be relevant. How important is it to get C-level sponsorship as a prerequisite for this to succeed?
From my perspective, very important, because of two reasons, and both of our customers got that visibility from the C-level, and in many cases, it was driven by the CPO to start the project in the first place. There are two reasons. So one reason is in the end, that innovation team needs to be able to interface with other teams in the organization, and sometimes even stomp their foot to push people to do something. They don't have any power whatsoever. The bigger the organization, the more tendency there is towards inertia, that we've been doing it the same way we've been doing so far, and we're happy, so go away.
Yeah, especially in business cultures that are a bit more resistant to change. Yeah.
If you don't have the C-level support on that side, then you can have problems. And the second thing is, again, coming back to this win-win approach, you need to be able to promise your suppliers something. So either this sharing of benefits, but then somebody has to maybe adjust the contracts. You might promise them, for example, better payment terms or new projects or something like that. Yeah, but you need to have the power to actually make those promises and make those promises in a credible fashion. It's very similar, if you think about it, to supplier management, because it's very easy to call a supplier a strategic supplier. But what does it really mean? What does a supplier gain from being a strategic supplier? And this is where the C-level support comes into play.
And it's something that's always iterated, isn't it? Are you a strategic supplier or you're a preferred vendor? What does that actually mean? What am I getting for it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So finally, if you had a message then to any companies that had maybe been sitting on the fence for a while or had not really approached this in a more strategic, methodical way, what would be your one sort of biggest tip in terms of getting their arms around supplier innovation and potentially using a piece of software like what Procurence Meercat offers for evaluating and assessing and storing this data?
Mm-hmm. I would say start small. So start from those continuous improvement projects or simple issues, because then you start with the volume and you can show, okay, this really works. We can communicate with suppliers. People see the benefits. What people should not do is to start a supplier innovation project with the big hope that they will catch the big fish straight away. Because of course we're all extremely willing to find this next big thing. But if you have luck, then you catch the big fish. If you don't have luck, you should focus on the daily bread and butter, as it were. Sometimes, if I can tell you another story, it's a real life example of the failure of innovation ecosystems in a way. There was a Polish company, Skycrops, was a startup. They've been working on AI-based system that scanned orchards, apple orchards. That was their initial product that they wanted to deal with. And they scanned the trees and the apples for potential problems with pests and so on, so that the system would say which individual tree or sometimes individual apple would have to be sprayed with chemicals. So it would save the company or save the farmer potentially a lot of money on chemicals and reduce the use of the chemicals. And in the end, they went bankrupt. And that I talked them pretty much 2 months before that happened. And at the same time, after talking to ACO, we've realized that they also were working on a similar issue, or they have a team working on similar products. So nothing worked out in this example, but that's the matter. That's exactly the matter of luck. Yeah. Sometimes, if conditions were perfect, those two organizations would have found themselves a year before. And ACO could simply, take over the small startup and have all the know-how that was already developed and insource it and benefit from that. But since in this case there was no lucky chance, both parties are the worse.
Yeah, it's the first thing that you do in your first economics module at university, isn't it? Perfect knowledge of a market. Yes, absolutely. So, Maciej, before we sign off, where is the best place that people can find you if they would like to learn a little bit more about what you offer?
You can go to our LinkedIn profile. You can also go to our website. So that's www.procurence.com, Procurence. And also, as I said, LinkedIn is also the good place to find me.
Fantastic. I will link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And supplier innovation, I think, is a very hot topic at the moment. So it's great to see that there's also innovation in the software market here when it comes to providing solutions in this area. All the best and wish you success. Speak to you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.
So that was Maciej. Procurence Meercat is the company. If you missed that, it's in the show notes as well. Just a couple of things before we sign off. We also have a newsletter here at the ProcureTech podcast. Just head to the show notes and click on the link if you would like to subscribe, and we will bring you procurement technology goodness every month into your mailbox. All the new news regarding funding, takeovers, innovation, new companies entering the market, all that lovely stuff we have once a month for you there. Don't forget to check out our LinkedIn page as well and subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast player if you want to get notifications every week when we launch a new episode. Thank you very much for listening. We know that there are a lot of procurement podcasts out there, so we particularly appreciate that you've decided to insert us into your earballs today, and we will be here again for you same time next week. Until then, take care and bye for now.